Wizard Foss, Chapter 2. The Council with the Munchkins. She was awakened by a shock so sudden and severe that if Dorothy had not been lying on the soft bed, she might have been hurt. As it was, the jar made her catch her breath and wonder what had happened. And Toto put his cold little nose into her face and whined dismally. Dorothy sat up and noticed that the house was not moving, nor was it dark, for the bright sunshine came in at the window, flooding the little room. She sprang from her bed and with Toto at her heels ran and opened the door. The little girl gave a cry of amazement and looked about her, her eyes growing bigger and bigger at the wonderful sights she saw. The cyclone had set the house down, very gently for a cyclone, in the midst of a country of marvelous beauty. There were lovely patches of greensward all about, with stately trees bearing rich and luscious fruits. Banks of gorgeous flowers were on every hand, and birds with rare and brilliant plumage sang and fluttered in trees and bushes. A little way off was a small brook, rushing and sparkling along between green banks, and murmuring in a voice very grateful to a little girl who had lived so long on the dry, grey prairies. While she stood looking eagerly at the strange and beautiful sights, she noticed coming towards her a group of the queerest people she had ever seen. They were not as big as the grown folk she had always been used to, but neither were they very small. In fact, they seemed about as tall as Dorothy, who was a well-grown child for her age, although they were, so far as looks go, many years older. 3 were men and 1 a woman, and all were oddly dressed. They wore round hats that rose to a small point a foot above their heads, with little bells around the brims that tinkled sweetly as they moved. The hats of the men were blue, the little woman's hat was white, and she wore a white gown that hung in plaits from her shoulders. Over it were sprinkled little stars that glistened in the sun like diamonds. The men were dressed in blue, of the same shade as their hats, and wore well-polished boots with a deep roll of blue at the tops. The men, Dorothy thought, were about as old as Uncle Henry, for 2 of them had beards. But the little woman was doubtless much older. Her face was covered with wrinkles, her hair was nearly white, and she walked rather stiffly. When these people drew near the house where Dorothy was standing in the doorway, they paused and whispered amongst themselves, as if afraid to come further. But the little old woman walked up to Dorothy, made a low bow, and said in a sweet voice, "You are welcome, most noble sorceress, to the land of the Munchkins. We're so grateful to you for having killed the wicked witch of the East and for setting our people free from bondage." Dorothy listened to this speech with wonder. What could the little woman possibly mean by calling her a sorceress and saying she had killed the wicked witch of the East? Dorothy was an innocent, harmless little girl who had been carried by a cyclone many miles from home, and she had never killed anything in her life. But the little woman evidently expected her to answer, so Dorothy said with hesitation, "You're very kind, but there must be some mistake. I have not killed anything." "Your house did, anyway," replied the little old woman with a laugh, "and that is the same thing, see?" She continued, pointing to the corner of the house. "There are her 2 toes, still sticking out from under a block of wood." Dorothy looked and gave a little cry of fright. There indeed, just under the corner of the great beam the house rested on, 2 feet were sticking out, shod in silver shoes with pointed toes. "Oh dear, dear," cried Dorothy, clasping her hands together in dismay. "The house must have fallen on her. Whatever shall we do?" "There's nothing to be done," said the little woman calmly. "But who was she?" asked Dorothy. "She was the wicked witch of the East, as I said," answered the little woman. "She has held all the Munchkins in bondage for many years, making them slaves for her night and day. Now they're all set free and grateful to you for the favor." "Who are the Munchkins?" inquired Dorothy. "They're the people who live in this land. of the east where the wicked witch ruled. Are you a Munchkin? Asked Dorothy. No, but I am their friend, although I live in the land of the north. When they saw the witch of the east was dead, and the Munchkins sent a swift messenger to me, and I came at once. I am the witch of the north. Oh, gracious, cried Dorothy. Are you a real witch, a good witch? And the people love me. I am not as powerful as the wicked witch was who ruled here, or I should have set people free myself. But I thought all witches were wicked, said a girl who was half frightened at facing a real witch. Oh no, that is a great mistake. There were only 4 witches in the land of Oz, and 2 of them, those who live in the north and the south, are good witches. I know this is true, for I am one of them myself and cannot be mistaken. Those who dwell in the east and the west were indeed wicked witches, but now that you have killed one of them, there is but one wicked witch in the land of Oz, the one who lives in the west. But, said Dorothy after a moment's thought, Aunt Tem has told me the witches were all dead years and years ago. Who is Aunt Tem? Inquired the little woman. She's my aunt, who lives in Kansas, where I came from. The witch of the north seemed to think for a minute, with her head bowed and her eyes upon the ground. Then she looked up and said,